Sorry?
Are you becoming a personality?
Yes,
something marginally along those lines, which I rather... It seems to have been thrust upon me rather than even a certain flow of events about this. But anyway, obviously we're going to have to recover some of that ground.
Recut what?
Recover some of that ground. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you seem incredibly comfortable up on stage playing with the group. But,
yeah.
I mean, how difficult has it been making that transition to being a solo artist?
Well, it's not difficult at all. I mean, playing in a band is playing in a band, and all these musicians are very good and very nice people as well, and so it's easy.
But was it difficult in the intervening period between the end of the Pink Floyd and the solo album, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking?
Yeah, I suppose it takes a while to sort yourself out and to find the kind of people that you really want to play with and gather them together in one place at one time and start sounding like a band. Yeah, it does take a while. I mean, it doesn't just happen overnight.
Did you feel shell-shocked to any extent at the end of it all?
No, I didn't, no.
I mean, the theme of Radio KAOS...
Go for it, God! Yeah, bite the bullet.
The theme of Radio KAOS is about a boy with brain damage from South Wales who ends up in Los Angeles. I mean, what exactly occurs within the scope of the record?
God, so many difficult questions. I can't explain the record on television. I cannot start explaining the record on television. Anyway, let's keep running. We'll eventually get to something.
But you can explain the plot.
The plot of the record. Yeah. No, I can't. I'm not going to talk about the plot of the record.
Go on.
No, I'm not going to talk about the plot. I'll tell you why, because it sounds crazed, and it is mildly crazed when you start. If I start describing, it's like saying, I've written this play, and it's going to be on in your local theatre in the next couple of months or so, and I'll now tell you what it's about and what happens and who the characters are and how you wouldn't do it. And I, although in print with you, I've attempted to explain something of what the record's about. In a filmed interview, I find it very difficult.
I mean, why do you think you find it difficult?
Well, because the record speaks for itself, and it needs to be, you have to listen to the record. If you want to cop what's on it, you have to listen to it. It's not a story that can be told briefly and verbally in a set-up situation in an interview like this. It wouldn't do it justice, or me justice.
But I mean, it is a large theme.
I'm very keen on justice.
It is a large theme, though, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's about lots and lots of large themes. It's about monetarism, and it's about, lots of large themes. I've been doing about 15 interviews a night for the last week. Actually not, but 3 or 4 every night. And so maybe I'm interviewed out in terms of talking about Radio KAOS. I can't tell anybody else about Billy. They're going to have to bloody well find out for themselves.
But anyway, Billy is this paraplegic boy, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yeah, and he's from Wales. Yeah.
And there's matters like the miners' strike.
Yeah.
One's intuitive forces. Yeah. Terrorism.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, there are many themes in it.
Yeah.
But I mean, all your work really tends to have these. I mean, very large themes. I mean, do you feel that you have to take this upon yourself, or I mean, do you find it difficult to do that?
I think I would find it very difficult to make short, meaningless songs, if you see what I mean.
But often people can concentrate on the microcosm.
I don't find it any more difficult or less interesting or whatever to do what I do than I'm sure other people do in rock and roll to do what they do, which may be very different, if you see what I mean. I've always made what are called concept albums, and the records are always about something or other, and that's what interests me, and that's the form within which I work and will continue to work, hopefully.
I mean, do they grow, in fact? Do they always start off with the overview, or do they grow?
No,
from a
no,
particular
they
point?
grow out of usually one specific idea or one specific. The Wall, for instance, grew out of standing on stage in Montreal in the Olympic Stadium in front of 90,000 people and realizing that the whole thing was a disaster for everybody involved. The band, the audience, everybody. And that's where the theatrical idea of building a wall across the front of a stage developed from. This piece comes from sitting quietly in a room and starting to write songs and allowing many of my unconscious feelings to emerge through that process, and then having a look at the songs and saying, good heavens, I've written a song here about a miner called Benny who throws a concrete block off a motorway bridge onto some innocent text. Why the fuck have I written that song? You know, and then I look down all the avenues and possibilities and think, well, maybe it's something to do with my concern about South Wales or some people I know there, namely the male voice choir who I've worked with before, and or a number of other possibilities. And at the end of the roads that I search down then, I find monetarism and other pernicious economic philosophies, and slowly the work develops. But the narrative starts from the song Who Needs Information?
So that was the first song that was there?
No, well, that wasn't the first song I wrote, but it was the first one that had anything to do with any narrative. The first song I wrote in this series of songs was a song called Get Back to Radio, which isn't on the record.
I mean, how much stuff do you ditch, in fact? How many of your
about
songs
half
actually
of
make
it.
the record?
There's about half. I used about half of it.
I mean, say, on the record, say, like The Wall, I mean, would it be about the same percentage?
No. The Wall used everything. Every last scrap and scraping. With the exception of one song which appeared in the film, which was the second part of Empty Spaces, all the stuff about shall we buy a new guitar, that didn't fit on the record for some reason.
But it was a huge album, obviously.
And it was a double album.
A huge double album, exactly. It used up a lot of songs. But
it was heavy. It weighed 2-3 pounds.
Yes, exactly.
Loaded. Sorry.
But as you say, it grew from that moment at that show in Montreal.
Yeah.
I mean, why exactly do you think you felt uncomfortable about it? I mean, you felt...
Well, I think that all stadium gigs are alienating experiences. They're no good for the audience and they're no good for the performers. They're only about money. And when an occasion like that is that, well, they're generated by two things. They're generated by money and the mysticism of rock and roll. You know, like there's a thing that people who go to stadium shows go, oh God, it was fucking great. There were 85,000 of us there, and we all had to piss standing up. And my girlfriend queued for 18 hours to buy a hamburger. It was wonderful, you know. And you have to sense when you hear things like that. Well, hold on a minute, you know. Not all the real connections are being made. And what it turns out about, it's about there's a kind of masochistic desire to be in an uncomfortable situation with a lot of other people all in an uncomfortable situation as well. And for the band, of course, it's money. There's no other motivation.
And interestingly enough, those gigs seem to be very much on the increase.
Yeah, well, maybe maybe. Are they?
Oh, I mean, certainly in London there's been, this year, Bowie, U2, Prince was going to have done it, Madonna's doing it. Whereas, you know, perhaps 5 years ago, they were
different
very
strokes
pure
for different folks, but I'm not interested.
Have you been to them yourself, to watch groups?
I've been to one or two, yeah.
Who have you seen?
I'm not going to talk about them, because they're all awful,
yes,
and I'm not going to put people down. That's up to them. If that's what they want to do, that's up to them. And they, you know, people can make a case for doing it. There's always a case made, well, we have to do it because we've got so many zillions of fans. If we didn't play in the stadium, they wouldn't all be able to see us.
But they can't see them anyway, of course.
Well, no, I mean, the point about that is, well, if that's the case, why not charge $5 a ticket? And make the same money you make when you do an arena gig. So it just doesn't hold water, you know. That's all right, you know. There are a lot of people who do stadiums who say, I'm doing this stadium gig because I can make $2 million a night. And that's all right, if you like that kind of thing. And if that's what they're in it for, that's all right.
Was there a stage when you started off where
I'm sure if I was skint, I'd do one. You see what I mean? Sorry, go on.
Was there a stage when you started off in the Pink Floyd where you did want, you know, the money as much, the vast quantities of money, as much as the artistic success? Well, what did you actually want?
Oh, yeah, I think when I was kind of 15 years old.
What's the idea? being able to buy a car and a house.
Yeah, yeah, well, that was... No, it was the idea of not having to get up in the morning that really appealed to me. I loved I just thought... I mean, I can remember my fantasy extremely well, and it was to have a kind of bachelor flat somewhere, you know, and the idea of waking up at noon. And a very simple life where you got up and you sort of pottered about for a bit and read the papers and maybe had a little light lunch. And then at about 4:30 started thinking about going downstairs to get in the van to go off to the gig up the M1, wherever it was. Then doing the gig and then going home and maybe a little light sex. And then up again at lunchtime for another light lunch and read the papers. And then, you know, it's a good life, so they tell me. Of course, it never happens like that. Does it, Andrew?
No, it doesn't, Roger. We're still trying, you know.
How did you find the reality of it almost immediately?
God, I can't remember that far back, Chris.
Why was that? Were you taking too much acid in the days of the Pink
You never
Floyd?
talk to anyone, you know.
No, no, not at all. It's a very long time ago. It's 20 years ago. Well, I can't remember it then.
I mean, did the Pink Floyd do a lot of drugs in those times, or was that a myth? I mean, actually, I've never read anywhere, I think
I think Sid did a fair bit of acid, and we all smoked quite a lot of dope at one time, but I almost never did any acid. I think twice in my life, and nothing else.
Because, of course, you started off as an R&B stroke blues band, didn't you?
Yep.
And I mean, I noticed in the rehearsals just now that you were actually playing a blues number.
Yep.
I mean, you obviously feel that's truly part of your roots?
Well, that's where all rock and roll come from. It's all black man's music, you know, it's all come from Africa. Even via the roots of, you know, the kind of the Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan route to what I enjoy. It all comes from Africa in the first place. It's all rooted in the blues.
And this music, actually, on this LP seems extremely danceable. I mean, I can imagine it being played in a club.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to surprise you.
Not at all. I've not met you often before, but I've always recognised that you're a man of great imagination. No, yeah, I can imagine people dancing to it.
I mean, how do you feel about music like hip-hop, for example?
I don't know what hip-hop is. What is hip-hop?
It's a modern form of dance music that comes out of New York.
I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. I saw the Beastie Boys the other day.
Well, that's a sort of mutant form of
Is
hip-hop.
it? Well, I'm sure it's all right, you know, if you like that kind of... Personally, I don't like that kind of thing. But, you know, it's a funny thing about rock and roll. One of the things people find very difficult to accept about it is that it's a very, very broad medium and should be allowed to be extremely broad. And I, in my little compartment, making my concept albums and worrying about monetarism at the bottom and all these things, is a perfectly legitimate form. And so are... Well, maybe not the Beastie Boys, but whoever they were copying is probably a legitimate form as well. That for a particular form, I'm not all that keen on, because it just is, because it's apparently so contrived. And the idea of contrivance in order to make money is something that I find silly. Well, not silly, because making money, I guess, is something everybody's got to make a living, right? But I don't like it. It doesn't mean anything. It's a transitory, silly bit of nonsense that doesn't concern me. Whereas there are other people, you know, who are working in completely different areas than I'm working in myself, who are doing it because that's what they do, and quite rightly. It's a very broad medium, that's all I'm saying.
I mean, who do you consider to be good musical artists at the moment?
Peter Gabriel was the last show I saw that was really was first rate. I've been working on the record and I've been rehearsing, and so I haven't been listening to a great deal of other music, I confess. I don't know, you've caught me at the end of a day's rehearsal and my mind is a bit blank on other artists.
No, in fact, the Beastie Boys is basically the Sex Pistols revisited in terms of the contrived outrage. I mean, the Sex Pistols came along at really the peak of the Pink Floyd success. And did you feel touched by that at all? Did you feel unnerved by it?
I don't think that they touched anyone but the media, personally. Mind you, that's silly for me to say, because obviously there were a lot of kids about who they touched. But I think that the whole punk thing has been blown out of all proportion by the media. It was a marvellous thing for the media to latch onto, you know, because it was a very, very simple and visual idea as well. You know, they had silly haircuts, so magazine covers and this and that and the other, and they went, yeah, we fucking hate fucking area, you know, which is good media stuff. But it didn't mean anything in terms of the ongoing nature of rock and roll. The only thing, I think, the only positive thing about punk was that it re-established the notion that people who couldn't play instruments were allowed to play rock and roll. And it had very much got to a position where people had got jolly good at playing guitars and keyboard instruments and drums and things. And there wasn't much room on the ground there for young people to go, yeah, we can do this. You know, it had become a bit intimidating. And I think punk was a good thing on those grounds because it allowed kids to go out and play without worrying about technique too much.
When you started off playing with the Pink Floyd, could you play very well?
I still can't play very well. I've never been able to play an instrument much. It's all bluff, Chris.
Well, bluff and technology?
No, actually very little technology in my case, but quite a lot of bluff. Actually, I have a reasonable sense of time. I don't play many notes, but the ones I do play tend to be reasonably in time.
How many basses do you own?
Well, there's my one. Oh my goodness. I own 2. There they are. No, not that one. That one's my proper one, and I've got a spare.
So you've never been an avid collector of instruments?
No.
I mean, do you consider yourself simply as a musician or as an artist in the broader sense?
I don't think about it.
Because I mean, your vision is very visual, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm kind of. I mean, at the moment, I'm fighting for survival. I'm here with all these wonderful musicians, and we rehearse every day, and it is fantastic fun, and I love every second of it. And I'm working madly on quadraphonic tapes and phone calls with filmmakers and this and that to put together the Radio KAOS show, and desperately hoping that we can encourage people to come and see it. Because there's a real resistance, you know, to this kind of work in the marketplace.
To what do you attribute that?
I don't know, you tell me. You know, you see a lot more of what goes on in rock and roll and in shows than I do.
Well, as you say, you know, as you were saying with the Sex Pistols, I mean, it was very easily marketable.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe people are angry with me for leaving Pink Floyd. That's a possibility. Is it?
I wouldn't have thought so particularly. Oh. I wouldn't have thought so particularly. But as you said...
That's a weight off my mind.
But as you said, you know, you are not a brand name anymore.
No, I'm not.
Although and the name of the Pink Floyd is, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, but I would have thought that you were known quite well as the principal writer.
Yeah, well, but that doesn't make any difference to people when they buy tickets for concerts. Well, not enough, anyway, to make it a smooth passage.
But yet, I mean, I suppose you're saying that a record like Dark Side of the Moon, people didn't really look at the credits.
But I'm sure a lot of people did. What, you mean to see that I wrote most of it? Well, I don't know. I think I haven't the slightest idea.
But I mean, it was an immensely successful record. I mean,
yes, it was.
What do you attribute its success to?
It was a very good record, Chris. God, we've been over this